Hey my quilty friends, in today's video I'm going to show you how to finish off your quilt using the self-binding technique. What we're going to do is base, quilt and bind our quilts in a much quicker and easier way than doing the traditional method. Now this video is part of my quilt donation drive and I'll put a link down below if you'd like to check out details about that. And if you like the quilt top that I'm using in this video, I'll also put the link down below for that too. But for now, let me show you how to do the self-binding technique. So we're going to start off by sandwiching our quilt, and I've got my backing here. I've given it a really good press. I've got it right sides facing down, and we want it to be at least, well, around 4 inches larger than our quilt top on all 4 sides. And then what we're going to do is attach it to our surface. We need a nice smooth flat surface. I'm using my kitchen island here. Use whatever you've got access to. We're going to use masking tape or painter's tape. And I'm just going to secure it, like I said, to my surface, and I like to start in the corners. Now the secret is we just want it to be nice and smooth, so make sure you've smoothed out your fabric. And we want it to be just slightly taut. We don't want it to be really tight so that if the masking tape comes off, it kind of springs back into place. No, all we're doing is securing it so it's nicely smoothed out but not stretched. So I'll start off with all 4 corners. And then what I'll do is I'll just come along and secure the sides as well. And a good test is to remove a piece, and if it doesn't move, then it's right. Like I said before, we don't want it to be springing back into place when the tape moves, because that means we've pulled it too tightly. So I've taped it all down, it's looking really good. One thing to note is if you're using directional fabric, take a note of that direction so that when you put your quilt top down, that's also going in the correct direction. Now let's get our batting. So I'm just going to take my batting and pop it on top and place it right in the middle. And then I'm going to smooth it out. So now my batting's all nicely smoothed out. We don't need to do anything else. It's like it almost naturally sticks to the fabric itself, which is really handy. Now I'm going to take my quilt top and put that on top. So just placing my quilt top on top and in the center again and smoothing it out, but making sure if you are using directional fabric for your backing, it's the way you want it to be facing. So then I'm just going to smooth that out, and just like with the backing, we just want it smooth. We don't want it pulled or stretched. Okay, so that's looking great to me, and you can see that I've got a nice 4-inch border from my backing fabric around all 4 sides. Now what I'm going to do is take my basting pins and just secure all 3 layers. Now some people don't like to use basting pins. I did have a friend just recently say to me she doesn't like them because they're too small. Something to note with basting pins is they actually come in different sizes, so you want to get the largest size, and I think the largest size is either 2 or 3 inches. You do not want the small size because yes, they are horrible to use. We could have used a spray base, which is just a water soluble glue, and then what we would have done is we would have sprayed when we did the backing, added the batting, then sprayed the batting, and then added the quilt top. But I like to use the pins, so that's what I'll do now, and I'm just going to pin it so all 3 layers are nice and secure. So before you start pinning, do think about how you plan to quilt it. I'm just going to do the echo stitch, which is sewing next to my seams, but keep that in mind before you pin, because you don't want to pin and then they're all in the way. And another thing to note is the pins do get dull. So as I'm putting them in, if I feel any friction at all as I'm trying to put them in, I just stop and put that pin aside and throw it in the rubbish, because it can damage the quilt top and create like little holes and things. So if I feel any sort of resistance from the pin, I quickly set it aside so I know to throw that pin out. So I've finished pinning. I'm just going to remove my tape now and then I'm going to start quilting. So I'll meet you at the sewing machine. I think I forgot to mention that the batting should be just slightly bigger than the quilt top when you were basting it. It doesn't have to be quite this big, but definitely a little bit bigger than the quilt top. Now when we're quilting, the most important thing to remember is we're doing self-binding. So what we're going to do is whenever we're coming up to the edge, we only want to quilt up to about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So if I was quilting along here, I would quilt all the way up to here, and then when I'm 1/4 of an inch away from that edge, I would stop. And that's because what we're going to do when we're finished is we're going to very carefully cut this batting and then do our self-binding, and that just gives us a little bit of wiggle room to get our scissors under and get a really nice tidy cut. So now what I'm going to do is quilt, and like I said, you can quilt it however you like. You could do echo stitch, stitch in the ditch, you could do along on the diagonal and then maybe do 5 inches along on that diagonal, which would be really cute, whatever you like. So I am using quilting gloves because I do find it helps just maneuvering the quilt and you've just got a little bit more control. I'm stitching at stitch length 3. I'm using wonderful confetti thread, and I've found a point where I want to start in the center of my quilt, and then I'm just going to follow these lines and do an echo stitch. Now we do need to do a back stitch so it's nice and secure. One alternative is what I've started trying to see how that works for me is I'm bringing my stitch all the way down to like a 0 and doing a couple of those, then bringing it up to 3 and then stitching, which just means I don't have to do like a back stitch going backwards and forwards, which is really obvious. So now I'm just going to quilt my quilt and I'll see you when I'm done. Just make sure that your surface is nicely smoothed out wherever you're quilting, and try not to have the weight of the quilt dragging, which will then pull at your quilt. So I've finished my quilting, and now we need to trim our excess batting and backing here. Now this bit's a little bit fiddly, but we're just going to take our time. What we need to do is trim the batting so it's in line with the quilt top, but we need to keep 1 inch of the backing. So what I'm going to do on this side is really easy because I didn't sew right up to the edge of my fabric. All I'm going to do is tuck that backing right underneath and trim that excess batting off. So this side's going to be really nice and easy. I'm just going to line up my ruler on the edge of my quilt and trim. Do double check that your backing isn't underneath, because we do not want to be cutting that. So I'm just lining up the edge of my quilt top, and then I'm making sure this line is nice and straight on the edge of the quilt there. And then when I'm happy, I'll cut. Okay, so that's our first side done. I'll start with just doing the batting all around, and then we'll come back and address the backing. So now I'll turn it to the next side. It's a little bit tricky on this side because here I've sewn right up to that 1/4 inch away from the edge. So now what I'm going to do is just tuck that backing underneath the best I can, just like I did. And we want it to be sitting nice and flat. And now I've got 2 options. If I think that the backing is really well out of the way of my rotary cutter, I could use my rotary cutter now. But what you can also use is scissors, and if you're a little bit nervous, you might be more comfortable with scissors because then you can really take your time and just make sure you're cutting through one layer. So all I'll do is just follow the edge of my quilt top very carefully. Oop, and there I can see my backing. I'm just going to tuck it right out of the way and trim. And we can just keep checking. And then I'll just do this around the whole edge of my quilt. So take your time and then let's trim all our batting. So now we need to cut the backing so that it's 1 inch away from the edge of our quilt top. So I'm just going to take my ruler, pop it on top. Now the quilt top is thick and then that sort of, so it's like a ledge. So what I do is find my line. So I'm on this edge of my quilt top and I've got a line here. So I know it's nice and straight. Well, I do sort of push it over to the side. So I'm going to be getting a nice straight edge. And then I'll cut. And then I'll just move it along and repeat that until I've done all 4 sides. Okay, and then just turning and doing exactly the same on this side and going around the whole quilt until I'm finished. So now what we're going to do is make our binding. So we're going to take the edge of the backing and fold it over to meet the edge of our quilt, and then we'll press. And then what we're going to do is fold it over again, creating our binding. And then I will just give that a press so it helps it sit nicely and stay in place when we're sewing it. Then I'll just clip it in place, and I'm just making sure that the layers are all sitting nicely before I clip it. Go all the way along the edge. Then on the corner here, I'm going to take this folded edge and fold it up to meet the edge of our quilt. And I will press. Then what we're going to do is fold this edge again. And I'll press that down. And then we're going to fold it over just like we did this side. And then I will press that again as well. Okay, and then when we're happy, I'll clip, and then folding it over just creates a really nice mitered corner here. So it's a little bit fiddly. Make sure you're happy with how it's sitting, and then when you are, I like to pop a clip right there and then right over the top to make sure it's staying in place, and then I'll clip the rest. And then I'm just going to carry on all the way around until I've pressed and clipped all my binding. Now what we're going to do is just stitch along the very edge of our binding. I'm using a left compensating foot, which is a special foot you can get with a Juki. You can also get it with other sewing machines, but I'm sorry, I don't know what it's called for other sewing machines. It's the left compensating foot for a Juki. And what it does is it allows me to stitch right on the very edge. I butt this ledge up against the edge of my binding, and it gives me a beautiful, nice stitch right on the edge of my binding. Otherwise, if you don't have a foot like that, just work out about a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the edge of your binding, and then I'm going to be stitching at stitch length 2.5, and I'm just going to go around the entire edge. I won't worry about a back stitch, and then I'll just sew right over the top when I get back around to it. Just removing the clips as I come up to them. When I come to the corner, I'm just going to lift my foot up, make sure my needle's down and turn, and then carry on around the next side. So there's our finished quilt. Isn't that super cute? Let's just take a closer look at that binding and the back. So there we have our binding. Doesn't that look great? Now you can't even tell from the front that we've used the self-binding technique It's only when we turn it over to the back that you can see that. And if we just have a look at that mitered corner, that turned out really nicely too. And then if we take a look at the back, that's what it looks like on the back. So we've just got that stitch line where we sewed on our binding. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Don't forget, I'll put the links down below for my quilt donation drive. I'd be thrilled to bits if you want to join me. And if you like the quilt top I used in this video, I'll put a link up above and you can check it out there. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.